Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3Iron and today we are talking about Flask Management, how to not panic smash your flasks in Path of Exile. Thanks so much to everybody that voted in last week's poll to determine what and when we were going to display these upcoming couple of videos. If you'd like to participate in community discussions and community polls like that, you can of course do that by hitting the like, subscribe, and dinging the bell. We always have wonderful discussions here in the community on an almost daily basis. Of course, today we've got several different things to get through in talking about Flask Management. And so today we're going to talk about 5 things in particular. First off, the types of flasks that are available in Path of Exile. Secondly, panic situations to be aware of. Thirdly, proactive Flask usage. Fourthly, reactive Flask usage. And then fifthly, some general tips. If at any point in time during the video and during our discussion today, you'd like to revisit any of the sections that we're discussing or jump ahead, there is a convenient timestamp placed directly above my slightly balding forehead, and all of our links as well as citations are provided down below in the video description. So first off, let's talk about types of flasks. There are essentially 3 different types of flasks in Path of Exile. Why are there 4 different pictures? Well, we'll get into that maybe later on down the road. But think for the moment, just for today's discussion, of flasks in one of 3 different ways. First off, there are recovery flasks, which these are flasks that focus on getting something back that you've lost. You've got life flasks, mana flasks, and then hybrid flasks that recover a little bit of life as well as a little bit of mana simultaneously. Then second off, you've got utility flasks. Any sort of flask in Path of Exile that is a utility flask is going to be filled with a green substance in it. So that's our last picture that's featured here as an example of utility flasks. In the category of utility flasks, you've got a wide swath of almost anything you could dream of. You've got Quicksilver flasks to help out with movement. You've got resistance flasks to help with both chaos as well as elemental resists. You've got Stibnite flasks and Jade flasks to help out with evasion. You've got offensive flasks like your Silver Flask or your Diamond Flask to help with either critical or onslaught abilities. You've got ground effect flasks, which allow you to essentially create chilled ground or consecrated ground. And then you've got phasing on top of that you can get through the Quartz Flask, as well as additional physical damage mitigation through the Basalt Flask. Then on top of that, the third category is unique flasks, which we are not covering today in our video. So primarily what we're talking about is either recovery flasks and how you use them and how not to use them, and utility flasks and how to use them and how to not use them. So the second major category that we're talking about today is panic situations. Situations in which you need to be aware of your own gameplay habits and your own gameplay style that maybe is a little bit trigger happy or maybe is a little bit panicky. When stuff hits the fan in Path of Exile, you might be liable to smash all of your flasks, and then you run out of flasks and you don't have them when you really need them. So panic situations to be aware of. We just did a death recap video over the weekend, which will be linked down below in the video description as well. There should be a little floating ethereal card that you can just click on and save to watch next. But of course, these are some of the general principles, not a whole dedicated discussion here today. There's a whole dedicated discussion in that video on this, but some general stuff just to be aware of. Panic situations means you need to know what your build is weak against. If you know what your build is weak against, you can know what is going to cause you to panic and then smash all of your flasks. So you need to be able to answer questions like, what is it that my build is weak to? Secondly, you need to know what type of content kills your character and kills them very quickly. What type of content is dangerous to you? Is that incursion temples? Is that synthesis bosses? Is that bossing in general? Is there a particular tier of delving that you can get to, but maybe some other tiers of delving that you can't get to? Are there particular types of map mods or even monster types that are particularly difficult for your build to deal with? So know what type of content kills your character. And then thirdly, know what types of mods and monsters are a challenge for your build. So maybe it's not going to straight up kill you, but maybe it's going to be problematic or difficult. So I'll give one quick example of this. For me, I have played this game. I've had an account on the game since 2013, but I really only started digging deep into this game since 2016, and I still don't regularly kill at Zeri. It's not like something that I go out of my way to kill at Zeri for. It's a fight that for people who take the time to learn it, they know how to do it. And most of the time my builds can do at Zeri, but for me, that's just a challenging fight. I usually make a mistake. or simply forget which of the clones that I'm supposed to kill at what point in time. So be aware, be self-aware of what mods and monsters are a challenge for your build, and then you can either rerun all of those types of monsters and mods and zones in order to get better at it, or you can say this is something that's just particularly challenging for this type of build, so I'm going to avoid it entirely. Thirdly, today, we're talking about proactive flasks and their usage, how you ought to be using proactive flasks. So first off, proactive flasks can be defined as flasks that you want up as much as possible. If you have charges on these, you're going to want to use them. These are not reactive flasks in any way, shape, or form. There is no reason for you to have to save flasks or save flask charges, except for the reason that you're going to want to reactivate it again once the duration on the first usage runs out. You want these sorts of flasks to be up as much as possible. So what panic smashing does to proactive flask usage is it simply means you're going to have shorter and shorter durations of these very much needed continual uptime duration based buffs that you won't have available to you because you've smashed your flask too often. So, offensively, oftentimes proactive flasks help with every possible moment of providing DPS. So let's take, for example, a utility flask like a diamond flask that makes your critical strike chance lucky. What this does is it essentially rolls your critical strike chance twice, and it takes the better roll and says, hey, you've got twice as many opportunities essentially to roll and hit for critical strike chance. It's really, really nice. If you think about it in a D&D sense or in a dice rolling sense, it's essentially getting to roll twice as many dice to hopefully hit a crit, which is great. Offensively, you want to keep that flask up as much as possible if you're a crit based build, because you've dumped all of your passive points, as much currency as you can, into weapons and gear that allow you to stack your crit multi or your critical strike ability. So having that diamond flask up is really, really effective for your overall DPS. That doesn't mean that you're reactively smashing it when there's a particular scary or panic moment. It means that you have that thing up as much as possible. Defensively, proactive flasks are very, very important because they help with every possible source of incoming damage that's out there. If you've identified something that is particularly challenging for your build, a type of content, a type of mod, a type of monster that is particularly difficult for your build and might end up killing your build, then a proactive defensive flask allows you to have peace of mind as you are playing through that zone, because you know the thing that was giving your build trouble has now been answered by a flask, and you're always going to have that up as much as possible because you're learning not to panic smash your flasks. You're learning to keep them up based on their duration and cycle them appropriately. Fourthly, utility flasks that are proactive help with quality of life and build efficiency. There are two primary examples of this. The first one I'm going to simply say is consecrated ground. So sulfur flasks that create consecrated ground are great because they help you now that consecrated ground provides life recovery as well as increased crit. It's both an offensive and a defensive ability, so it's kind of a hybrid in that regard, and it's great. There's a lot of different builds that take advantage of consecrated ground and different things that you are doing, different stats and different abilities that get boosted while you are standing on consecrated ground. So that's one example that it improves your build efficiency greatly by standing on consecrated ground. So by keeping that consecrated ground proactively up wherever you are at, no matter what the scenario is, you are taking advantage of all of those different buffs that your build has built into it because you have focused on consecrated ground. The second one is, as a utility example of a proactive flask, is Onslaught. So Onslaught you might think of as just exclusively offensive for DPS boosting for attack or cast speed, but it's also great because it helps you out when you're using mobility skills. So whether that's a mobility skill that's based as an attack like shield charge, or if that's a utility mobility skill like flame dash that's based on cast speed. Really, really helpful to have Onslaught up and around to help you with the quality of life of your build. Maybe you need to get away from something that's coming at you, and so therefore it's defensive. Maybe you want to get to the next pack a little bit quicker, and therefore it's offensive. So just think about how you are proactively using flasks to keep long durations going. And that's proactive flask usage. That's the key. You can have these run dry. That's fine because you're going to get to the next particular boss or the next particular pack of monsters faster to help you keep them up and to keep them going as a duration, cycling their cooldowns. What happens if you panic smash all of these buttons reactively is it probably meant you didn't have them up proactively to begin with. Otherwise, that fight or that encounter would have been a little bit easier. Your build would have been able to handle it a little bit easier. So essentially, if you're not taking advantage of and not using proactive flasks in a proactive fashion, you're actually losing out on a lot of build efficiency. And what I'll try to do on my particular flask bar is I will put my proactive flasks a lot of the time near one another, so that way I simply have to smash that side of the keyboard to keep proactive flasks going every couple of seconds. And then on the other side of my flask bar, I'll put reactive flasks, so that way I'm never smashing reactive flasks when I want to smash proactive flasks, and vice versa. A general tip for this is to keep proactive flasks on a mental 3 to 4 second cooldown. Most flasks are somewhere in that 3 to 4 second range. Yes, you can extend them. Yes, there are certain unique flasks that mess with that. But typically, if you're on a 3 to 4 second mental cooldown for when you're pressing your buttons for your proactive flasks, that is a good habit to be in, to always keep those effects going. And typically 3 to 4 seconds inside maps and inside zones is plenty of time for you to travel from pack to pack in order to be able to provide the needed recharge for those flasks to stay up for the next pack that you are traveling to kill. Fourthly, reactive flasks. So this is what I imagine many of you have been waiting to chat about, so let's wait no further. First off, you don't want to hit these flasks unless you absolutely need to. I know this is like the duh moment. This is the, oh, Iron, thanks for telling me what I already knew. But that's the reality of it. We're all watching this and participating in this discussion because we do this. We all do this. We all smash flasks sometimes when we don't need to. And what reactive flasks are, you need to think about them in this way. They are your emergency option. If you use your reactive flask too early, you will be dry on that flask for when you actually really need it. If that's in a boss fight, when you're in between, maybe say mobs spawning and ads spawning for you to be able to kill to recharge your flasks, which by the way, Path of Exile is a brilliant game in the way that it's designed most of its boss fights to have these specific phases where we get to kill these ads that come in, because it's essentially an opportunity for us to refill our flasks. So if you've smashed your flasks and you've panicked too early, and you don't have those mobs coming up during a boss fight, or if you're transitioning between zones and there's not going to be a pack immediately available to you to grab, you won't have those reactive flasks. So if something off-screens you or something attacks you that you weren't expecting, you won't have your emergency button. You won't have your 911 emergency room option, which are reactive flasks. So we really want to be disciplined as possible with reactive flasks. It's a lot different approach and a lot different style than the proactive flasks, which we always want to have going all the time. Thirdly, you want to mentally prepare yourself for why you are using these flasks. Answer the question for yourself. I know we chatted about this already a little bit, and we chatted about it in the death recap, but you need to mentally prepare yourself. Why is it that I'm going to use this flask? If you're using, let's say for a moment, a basalt flask, which reduces the amount of physical damage that's coming in. If you are using a basalt flask for a fight with a monster that does primarily elemental damage, unless you are converting some of that physical damage into elemental damage, there was no point in you bringing your basalt flask with you for that particular fight. So you're not mentally prepared for why you even have a basalt flask on your bar. If you are fighting or know to be fighting, let's say for instance in a map where monsters will deal a percentage of their additional damage as cold damage or as fire damage or as lightning damage, if you already know there's going to be additional sources of elemental damage in the map, then maybe a basalt flask isn't the right setup for this particular map. Mentally prepare yourself before you equip your flasks to know why it is that you are using these flasks and what scenarios you are using them in. So why is it that a basalt flask would be a reactive flask rather than simply a proactive flask that we want to keep up all the time? Well, there are one-shot mechanics all over the place in Path of Exile, and you'll want to be aware of them. And as you learn more about what monsters do in terms of their abilities and what they look like and what sorts of damage they deal, then you can prepare yourself, not just mentally, but then practically during gameplay to actually smash your reactive flasks appropriately in preparation for a big hit that is coming at your character. So, here's some questions for you when you're thinking about preparing yourself for a flask usage. Is this flask used to recover from a big hit. So let's say, for instance, like a life flask. Maybe you're a life-based character and you are using that life-based flask to recover HP, whether that's instantly or over the expenditure of a few seconds. Is your life flask primarily there to recover from a big hit? Okay, great. Don't ever touch that flask unless you see your life bar go down. When your life bar goes down, that's when you press that button. Only use it to recover from a big hit because that's primarily what it's there for. Secondly, maybe it's because this flask is because you ran out of mana, so you're actually using a mana flask. Oftentimes on Magic Find characters, I will actually run mana flasks because a lot of the time I have trouble maintaining mana if I'm not running with a support. So in that scenario, if you're running out of mana, that means that you're no longer able to DPS, and if DPS is the way that you leech, or it's the way that you stay alive, is by killing things or by leeching off of things, that's bad news for you. So your mana flask is actually reactive, because if you use your mana flask proactively, it won't be there when you run out of mana. If, however, you can learn what the mana cost is of your particular skill, whether that's a spell or an attack, and then offset that with the amount of times that you're using that skill. So if you're just standing there spamming the skill during a boss fight versus only having to use the skill maybe once or twice when you're clearing a pack, those are good things to know about your build. I need to do let's say 10 attacks on a rare pack. I need to do 3 attacks on a normal pack. That's great to know. Will 3 attacks make you run out of mana? Will 10 attacks make you run out of mana? You're going to want to know reactively when is the appropriate time for you to smash that mana flask, when it's going to give you the most efficiency out of that flask slot. And if the answer to both of those questions is that, hey, I don't know when these flasks are serving as a purpose in my build, we'll get to that in just a moment with some general tips, but we've got some general tips for you on that. So here's the tip. If you can't answer in a single sentence why and when you are supposed to be using these flasks, rethink about using the flask, or go back and revisit the guide that you're following to consider how the flask fits into the build. It could be that you're using a flask and you're following a guide that is meant to clear a very, very specific set of content, and you're not interacting with that content. So the flask that you have equipped isn't actually doing what the guide is hoping for it to do, because you're diving into different content. So revisit your flasks and then try to answer the question again. How is it that I'm using this flask? Is this reactive flask to recover from a big hit? Is this reactive flask to help me with DPS or recovery of my mana in any way? What is the purpose of this flask and how am I using it? Am I using it proactively or am I using it reactively? All right, fifthly, some general tips. We're just going to go through a bunch of these really quick. First off, prioritize killing mobs that are magic or rare. You should already be doing this because magic and rare mobs are simply worth more XP than regular normal mobs that are white, but they also give more flask recharges than normal mobs. So prioritize yellow and blue packs over white. Consider if your build could benefit from flask effectiveness or not. There are several places on the passive tree, which I've got linked here in this slide, simply that interact with flasks. This can be increased recovery on your life. It can be increased mana recovery. It can be extended duration. It can be extended effect of your flask. And of course, the Pathfinder is the flask effectiveness ascendancy. That's what you're seeing over there on the far right of Path of Building. But consider if your build could benefit or not from gathering some more flask effectiveness. There's really not a whole lot of places to grab this from on the passive tree or even in the game. So flask effectiveness is very, very powerful, and it's a relatively rare mod to pack onto gear as well. All right, some more tips continued. First off, don't let someone else tell you how to flask. So I know we're having an extended discussion here on how to flask, and I'm essentially telling you how to flask. But if you discover a trick that you simply rely on certain flasks, that's 100% fine. If you find a habit that is working for you and that's keeping your character up and that's allowing you to accomplish your goals, don't let me or anybody else tell you that you need to change your gameplay. If you found something that works, that's great. Actually, come and share that in the comments below so that way we all as a community can benefit from your experience about what's working for you. So don't let somebody else tell you how to flask, but do be open to suggestions if you're having trouble wondering what it is that your flasks are even doing and what purpose they're serving for your build. Secondly, if you're unsure of what Flask might be best for your build, then try to run your build. Don't do this in hardcore. Those of you who are watching, fellow G3 guildies that are watching this right now that I know are playing hardcore with me, do not do this in hardcore. Do this in softcore. It's not safe to try in hardcore. Okay, that's enough of a disclaimer. But try to run your build without Flasks for a few zones and see what's your build missing. What is your build dying to? What is it that is causing you to have to panic smash your Flasks? Is it particularly large physical hits? Is it that you're getting frozen? Is it an elemental status like freeze? Or is it ignites? Or is it shocks? Is it that you're getting trapped? Is it that particular sorts of degens are really hurting you? Is there a particular type of mob that is hitting you very hard? Identify what sort of damage that type of mob does. Is it physical? Is it elemental? Is it chaos? Is it a degen? Is it a hit? These are all questions that you will be able to answer and then address through equipping different types of Flasks. So if you're not sure what sort of Flasks might be good for your build, and this doesn't have to mean all 5 Flasks. I occasionally will do this when I'm playing a build and I go, yeah, these 4 Flasks are really, really needed and they all really make sense. But what about my 5th slot? I've got kind of an opening there, so what should I do with my 5th slot? And then I'll go and I'll play around. I still have my other 4 Flasks, but I'll play around with that 5th slot and see what is it that I need out of that 5th slot and what other options and opportunities are out there in terms of Flasks that could fill maybe a gap in my build. Next off, are you missing life or mana recovery? This is something that you're going to need, and Flask can provide for you. Next up, are you missing defensive layers like elemental resistances, elemental mitigation, physical mitigation, evasion, maybe mana recovery? There's a lot of players playing MOM right now in Synthesis. Are you in need of DPS or quality improvement, whether that's move speed, onslaught, maybe critical strike chance? These are different ways in which you can fill in that last and final Flask slot that otherwise you might not be thinking about using. Third general tip, upgrade your Flasks regularly, whether you are progressing through the game leveling or whether you are even in end game and you're looking at your Flasks and you're wondering, these Flasks have been working for a while. I wonder if there's an upgrade. There might very well be an upgrade in terms of a unique that's out there that's a replacement for one of your regular Flasks. Or it could be that you're actually at a stage in your character's progression that you don't need to rely on some of those Flasks that you thought you used to. Maybe if you go through a couple of play sessions and you go, I really haven't had to hit my reactive Flasks that much. That's okay. Maybe consider swapping out some of your reactive Flasks to a few more proactive Flasks that allow you to kill things faster and improve your build speed clearing. Maybe the opposite is true. Maybe you've got a lot of trouble in clearing because you're dying so often. Maybe switch a couple of those proactive Flasks off to reactive Flasks, and that's okay. You can use a few more reactive Flasks to stay alive. In general, as a general rule of thumb, in hardcore, I always default to having more reactive Flasks than proactive Flasks, because if I get hit with something, I need to get back up to 100% HP as possible because I'm paranoid. That paranoia leads me to actually be more disciplined in my Flask usage because, again, you shouldn't be hitting your reactive emergency Flasks unless there is a need for it. So upgrade your Flasks regularly, and if you find yourself not using those Flasks for a while, maybe change them out, try something different. Fourthly, improve the quality on your Flask. For the longest time, I didn't use glassblower's baubles on my Flask. I want to say it was like 2018 was when I was finally like, all right, I'm going to stop flipping these for currencies. I'll dump them into Flasks. Flask efficiency and quality is improved vastly by dumping in some glassblower's baubles onto your Flask. So make sure that you are using those. If you are new to the game and you don't understand what quality does, just hear me out. You will be very happy with top tier Flasks that you use glassblower baubles on. So if you're going to use those, make sure that you do it on end game style Flasks that you're planning on using for a while. Make sure you run through those other tips beforehand and that you're really certain these are the Flasks that I want to be using for an extended period of time before you invest a bunch of currency into them. Well, thanks so much for watching. Thanks again. Special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for supporting the channel and for helping us out. If at any point in time y'all have questions and feedback or even your own tips about maybe how to improve for others and you'd like to share those with the community, feel free to drop a comment down below. I always love interacting and having discussions with all of us right here in the G3 community. Once again, thanks so much for watching. And I think Smeagol and Rick and Morty will be around in just a second to give you a preview of some more G3 videos that you can watch in the meantime while you're booting up your next zone. So thanks once again for watching, and I hope that today is the day right after you upgrade your Flasks that you find a Mirror of Calandra.
Nice patrons, yes, good patrons. They're so kind and supportive.
I can't believe you watched that thing. That was good job. You did it. You got through the whole video. Yay.